Hello, my name is Bryan Grijalba, and today I'll be talking about free speech, and more importantly, why I believe it is the United States government's duty to impose legislative regulations on vastly popular social media companies who show any intention of regulating free speech on their platforms. With this talk, I hope not to convince everyone who watches this of my beliefs, but to just put forth or introduce this idea of regulating and imposing legislation on these big social media companies such as Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. To begin, some background. My name is Bryan Grijalba. I'm a bio major here at FIU, and I was born in Havana, Cuba. In 2005, my parents and I fled Cuba and came to the United States, escaping the communist regime in Cuba. As a result of growing up in a Cuban household and experiencing and hearing stories of the struggles of my parents and grandparents, I soon became passionate about topics such as free speech, something that was not granted to the citizens of Cuba under the tyrannical rule of Fidel Castro, but but that is a very important right for the citizens of the United States of America. So much so that it is written in the first sentence of the United States Bill of Rights. This brought me to create a TED Talk about free speech, as I believe that it is one of the most important rights established in this country, and why I think that big social media companies may be putting that in jeopardy. To put these into perspective, I first want to provide some insight as to the impact of social media on today's society, and more importantly, how it is intertwined with news and how people consume their news. When the Pew Research Center began tracking social media adoption in 2005, just 5% of American adults used at least one of these platforms. However, by 2011, that number had risen to about 50% of Americans, and today it sits at 72% of the public using at least one type of social media platform. This doesn't just include young adults. As more Americans have adopted social media, the social media user base has also grown more representative of the broader population. Young adults were among the earliest social media adopters and continue to use these sites at high levels, but usage by older adults has increased in the recent years. This graph shows different age demographics, and although the older demographics as the 65 plus remains low, it is still in between 25 and 50% at roughly 40%, which is still high and continues to keep rising. For many users, social media is part of their daily routine. Roughly 3/4 of Facebook users and around 6 in 10 Instagram users use these sites once a day. This gives insight to the extent at which social media is used in the US society. Now, how does this relate to news? According to another study conducted by the Pew Research Center in 2018, 1 in 5 US adults say that they often get news via social media, with social media sites. And this was conducted in 2018, where 20% of users of American citizens get their news on social media. I can only imagine that this number has grown in the last 2 years. This is very important because people use the news to make very important choices in their lives. So one of these things can be deciding the president of the United States, which is a vastly big decision that someone has to make. And in order for them to make this decision, I believe that they should be presented with all evidence, and not things should not be hidden from people. It shouldn't be certain parts. Okay, I want to skip that. Okay. Now that I have established social media's popularity, I want to touch upon a certain term before putting all this together and arguing my idea. Over the years, the United States courts have determined that speech does not merely consist of spoken or written words. For First Amendment purposes, many things are considered speech. One such thing is speech conveyed digitally in an online post, something that could be written in a Facebook post or a Twitter post. This brings me to the idea that social media platforms such as Twitter and Facebook are platforms where people go to communicate and put forth their opinions and ideas. No matter what the opinions are, people have the right to speak whatever they want under the First Amendment. However, there are countless cases of accounts from Twitter and Facebook that have been banned for spreading certain points of view, mainly to the right of the political spectrum. Just a few months ago, Twitter banned 7,000 QAnon linked accounts liberating 150,000 others as part of a broad crackdown, along with many other politically associated accounts such as Charlie Kirk, Steve Bannon, and even the New York Times for posting an article alleging corruption and attempted collusion between Burisma and Joe Biden, just to name a few. And Facebook suspended the accounts of more than 200 people on September 19th who were connected to an event protesting the constitution of the contested coastal gas link pipeline. Now, I don't agree with QAnon and many of the people that I listed above, but I don't think that they should be banned from the site, because by being banned from the site, they're not allowed to express their views in the internet, which is a predominant force in society, and thus their free speech is being regulated. Whether I agree with QAnon or not, they shouldn't be forced to not play out their political views on social media platforms. This brings me to the idea that the social media companies such as Facebook and Twitter are operating as entities, and one entity, in the case Twitter, is deciding what is going to be on its platform or not. That's no different than one entity such as maybe the Cuban government deciding what people can and cannot say. It's one entity, um, such as Twitter and Facebook, who think alike and are portraying that one side of the political spectrum is being removed from their social media platform, influencing what people see on the platforms. This brings me to my proposed solution or idea that these companies should be regulated. I believe that it is the United States government right to protect the rights of its citizens. One of these rights is a freedom of speech. Thus, the government must do everything in its power to protect the fundamental rights of free speech for its people. That's the point of the government, and they can do this by using legislation. Thus, I think that it should place a regulation so that only something in relation to graphic content or direct violent threat should be removed from a social media site, and simply placing news or a political point of view or providing evidence against a certain point of view should not be merit to remove an account or ban an account from saying something on these social media platforms such as Facebook and Twitter. The fact that if this is accomplished by the government, more people will trust these social media sites such as Facebook and Twitter, as it is starting to lose popularity among conservative users and users of the right, as they are being oppressed. These are my